Okay, welcome back. So let's see where we're at here. Yeah, I got your assignments graded from last week. So the chapter 5 homework. You have grades for that, and you got my solutions. And the midterm, you saw your grades for that on Blackboard, and I posted my solutions, or I sent those via email. And so let me know if you have any questions about those two assignments. Okay, and so today we're going to do the next chapter in your textbook, which is chapter 9. And that's going to be on the oligopoly models. And so we're going to spend a couple or 2 or 3 weeks on oligopolies because there's a lot to do. With, oh, hold on a sec. Okay, there's a lot we can do with oligopolies here. Okay, and then just a reminder, the chapter 8 homework is due today, and so make sure you get that in the discussion section sometime before today. Okay, and so I'll remind you later, but for next week's stuff, chapter 10, so we're going to do a couple weeks on oligopoly. Chapter 9 and chapter 10 are both on oligopoly. We're going to talk about kind of the basics of oligopoly today, and then a few models on oligopoly. And then next week, we're going to do a bunch of game theory stuff, which I think some of you will like. And I also posted a couple podcasts from like they're the Freakonomics podcast. And so if you get a chance, I'm not going to, it won't be test or anything, but if you get a chance, these both these podcasts here are very relevant to what we're going to talk about next week in the game theory stuff for oligopolies on advertising. And so if you get a chance, they're both pretty interesting and pretty relevant. And I put the links here. This takes you to the webpage. If you have if you have Spotify or some other service, you can listen to them there if that's more convenient. But they're both here. I mean, I don't. If you click on this, so there's a part one and there's a part two. All right, and so I'd like to at least discuss both of those next week. And so if you get a chance, again, if you, I'm not gonna, there won't be a test or anything, but we will talk about these couple podcasts because I think they're very relevant to what we're gonna do next week. And so if you get a chance, listen to those here, or if you have Spotify or Apple, whatever the other podcasts are, you can listen to those for free. Okay, so I'll remind you of that later. That's for next week, and maybe I'll remind you in email, but the links are here. Okay, so what we're gonna do today is chapter 9. Sorry, I keep having to let people into the. Okay. All right. So, chapter 9 is going to be the last type on oligopoly. So, what I want to do a couple of things a little bit different. I want to do kind of a summary of the types of models we talked about last week, and then today's how that ties in. And then I'll kind of there's some longer exercises or problems, and I kind of want to go through those step by step, just to make sure everyone has a good grasp on the math and the derivatives here. So the Okay, the PowerPoint for chapter CH9 today. I'm not going to open that right now. It's not, I think it's best if we just leave that for later. And so I want to just kind of go through some other stuff first. So we'll get to that. Actually, we might not even get to that. It's not the most important PowerPoint. Okay. So before we talk about oligopoly, I want to tie in this to the other types of models, the other types of markets. Okay, so I thought it'd be useful first just to kind of summarize the four types and how this one fits in. And so last time we talked about, we can make this bigger. Okay, so the first type, okay, the first type was perfect competition. The second type was monopoly. Actually, I'm gonna put these, I'm gonna rank these by like market power maybe. And so let me put the second one as monopolist and competition. And the one we're gonna do today kind of fits in between this one and monopoly. Which is oligopoly. Okay, so there we go. They go from kind of one extreme to the other, and so I rank them kind of in terms of market power and basically in terms of how much control they have over price. And so if I did this, okay, so what I said there is market power increases from left to right, and control over price also increases from left to right. So what that means is perfect competition essentially has no market power, and they essentially have no control over price. And once you get to monopoly, they have the whole market, so they have all the market power, and they get to set their own price, so they have 100% control over price. So you go from essentially a price taker to a price maker, and that's kind of like how I like to arrange them, going from left to right. So yeah, and then kind of the elasticity concept that's nice to point out here. Okay, so demand gets more inelastic from left to right. So we go from perfect competition, which is perfectly elastic, the demand curve, and then monopoly is going to be the steepest, the most inelastic because there's less options or there's no options. Right? There's either you buy from that monopolist your electricity, your gas bill, your water, your trash, whatever, but you don't have any other options when you're facing a monopolist that has that good or service that they're selling. Okay. So let me just summarize a few key points, and that'll help us bring in the one we're going to talk about today and next week, which is oligopoly. Okay. So the reason why oligopoly, so much time is going to be spent on it, and it's because really the most interesting stuff happens in the middle here. So these ones, the perfect competition, they're really just they don't have a lot of control over price. And Monopoly, they do whatever they want. And it's really in these areas where we talk about advertising and game theory and stuff that where the rivals and the companies react to each other and how they make decisions. And so that's why this one, where you have a few, we're essentially going to have a few big firms competing in the same market, and that's why it's most useful all these different types of models and game theories and stuff like that. Okay, so let me summarize a few key points to time in, and then we'll talk more about oligopoly for the rest of today and next time. Okay, so key features, just to kind of bring us back to the on the same page here. Key features of perfect competition. They're okay. Perfectly elastic demand, right? It's a horizontal demand curve. Okay, they're price takers. They either sell at the price or they don't sell. Their only choice really is how much output do they sell, if they sell. Okay, so market price is determined by long run equilibrium with supply and demand. And so the price can change, but in the short run, when the firms are making decisions, no control over price. They either take the price and sell whatever they want, or they don't sell, and that's really that they have no control over price, and that's set in the long run. All right, and we had a few examples. So remember, the key thing was perfect substitutes. So they're all selling the same identical good. Okay, so remember, perfect substitutes, agriculture, produce, farmers market, stuff like that. All right, so remember the example was the firms are selling the same exact apples or something like that at a farmers market. And so if we can assume they're selling the same exact item, really the only thing that customers care about is price. Okay, so the next one in terms of market power that we talked about last time is monopolistic competition. Okay, and the demand is not perfectly elastic. It's elastic, but it's downward sloping. So it's a downward sloping demand curve, but there are some options, and so it's flatter, but it is a normal downward sloping demand curve. All right, and then remember they had some like some of the brands charge a little bit higher price, but a lot of the like knockoffs, and so the really there's there's some degree of price control, but not a lot. So let's say they have, you know, some control over price. Okay, and remember the key thing here was they're selling the same things like shoes or toothbrushes or something, but they're slightly different. They have different brands, they have different features, and so the key here is all right. So slightly differentiated products, which means they're selling the same type of good, but they're a little bit different. Okay. That so and then we also had so some of the things you can study here or spend some time on in this type of market are the effects of brands. Okay, and also advertising, and that comes into both these types of markets here. And some examples we talked about. So I think there's many. If you want to think of the most, if you went through a list and try to think of the market with the most examples, you could. This is probably the one. So you could probably think of 1,000 things that go here, but let's just list a few. All right. So examples were most consumer products like cereal. Okay, so those types of goods where you can see that there's a lot of firms that sell cereal or shoes or cars, but they're selling different things, different brands, different features, and so the consumer has choices. Okay, so make a note that prices are slightly higher for brands and for goods that are advertised for because the consumer is essentially paying the price of advertising and the price of brands having a specific brand or a brand that's got some brand loyalty. The extra cost or the extra value for those things is essentially passed on to the consumer. So you're going to pay a little bit higher prices for something that has an advertising budget or something that is a well-known brand. But the consumer also gets the benefits of consumer choice. It can consumers can decide between all these different features and brands, and the concept of consumer choice is really seen here. Okay, and let me do Monopoly first before we do today's, where it fits in right here, so you can see how this one's going to fit in right in between Monopoly and monopolistic competition. Okay, so Monopoly demand is going to be very inelastic. Okay, and that's because there's only one firm selling it that sells there's no other firm that sells this good or service. They have the exclusive selling rights. Okay, okay, this firm is essentially a price maker. They get to set the price that they want because the entire market is under the demand of the monopoly. Okay, so the monopolist is by definition the single seller of a good or service, and the consumer has really no close substitutes from which to buy for. Okay, and remember some of the main examples were mostly the public utility companies. Okay, like your electricity company, your Edison, and your gas company, and those are probably the best examples there. Okay, and so yeah, so this is kind of, I think, a nice summary of the four types and the three we talked about, and then you can see the kind of where this one fits in terms of market power, and I guess where how the demand curve is more inelastic. So you can see that when the consumer, as the consumer has less choices, the demand curve gets more inelastic because, which would make total sense, they have less substitutes. So no substitutes, the everything is the same, and then these ones are somewhere in between. Okay, so yeah, I think that uh, that summarizes what we talked about last time, at least from the main features and the examples. Yeah, so did I miss anything there? I don't. If I did, let me know. But we'll start talking about how oligopoly fits in right here, kind of in between monopolist and competition and monopoly. Okay, so oligopoly essentially means there's a few firms that have quite a bit of market power, but there's I think the key thing is there's a few large firms. Okay, so think of it as monopolistic competition, but there's much less firms and they have much more power, and that's why there's a lot more that goes on here because a lot of the big tech firms and the big uh, the the highly valued firms you think of probably go here because they're competing in markets where there are some options, but these markets are dominated by a few really big firms. Okay, and so essentially demand is going to be inelastic, but more elastic than monopoly. So in terms of elasticity, it's going to fit in between. So let's say it's inelastic, but not as elastic as monopoly, not as inelastic as monopolies. Okay, I really should have done this in like Excel so I can make a. That's okay, so inelastic but more elastic than monopoly, right? So it fits in nicely there. And so there's brands, there's differentiated products, and there's advertising. So all these features here go here, but just think of the firms as bigger and more tech oriented. Okay, so just think of monopolistic competition, but break it or think of it as everything is bigger. So differentiated products, but we got big brands, big companies, big advertising, and a few um, very profitable or high market firms. And so technology, all the tech companies or all the big tech companies probably go into this area. Okay, so there's a little introduction. So there's a few large firms. Their demand curve is inelastic but more elastic than monopoly. Um, differentiated products, big brands, big companies, big advertising, big tech. So can can someone or can some of you think of some examples of what markets might be considered a oligopoly? So what are some examples of a market in which would fit the oligopoly structure? Can we think of some examples here? Okay, so let's see. All right, so big one here, smartphones. So there are some options, but there's limited options when you're buying a new smartphone. So there's Apple, there's Samsung, there's there's a few cheaper options. There's the Google Pixel, but your options are probably less than six or so in terms of brands and options of which to buy. So smartphones, definitely example of an oligopoly. Um, Cars. So cars kind of cross the line between monopolistic competition and oligopoly. And so I think they're almost like, yeah. So some people, I put them over here. So some people consider them monopolistic competition. Some people consider them oligopolies. And it depends if you're like, there's quite a few companies, but there's also a lot of companies that are owned by the same company. And so I don't know. Do we think I think to be an oligopoly, you probably got to have less than 10 companies. Um, so yeah, so I know like there's like the GM and Chevy are the same thing, so that counts as one. But if we put all the companies together, how many? I don't know. I'm not the hugest in the car research. Do you think we'd have more than 10? I think we do, but I'm not positive. I'm not counting like Formula One or stuff like that. So there's probably at least 10 companies that own all the cars, right? Or yeah. So I think well we'll put that one on the margin. So that's probably um, in monopolistic competition, but more on the higher end. So it's close, but I'd say just because of all the companies, you probably put that in over here. Okay. How about like operating systems? So there's the majority is Windows of the market. There's there's the Apple, the Mac OS, and there's a few. There's like the I don't know if anybody uses Linux anymore, but there's a few other lesser known options, but there's not very many. So it's mostly Windows, and then a close second Mac, and they really have most of the market there. Okay, so how about game consoles? Like there's options, but there's not many. There's not many to choose from. There's PlayStation, there's Xbox, there's Nintendo, and that's it, right? Or there's computer games. Okay, another big tech thing recently that would go here is rideshare, Uber and Lyft. Those are your only options, right? So you see the idea that if you have, and most of these are technology based or app based or computer based or smartphone based. But if you have a few firms dominating the entire market. And well, this one, I'm not sure if it would go here or here, but I'm going to put it here. And all right, so streaming services. Now, usually I put that one here, but there's becoming so many of them that it might now be monopolistic competition. And so that one would be on the border as well. So I'm not sure if that would go here or over here. It kind of depends. But I'd say at the moment, we probably have more than 10, so that might go over here. Okay, so example, so what about eBay and Amazon? So that's the eBay and so that we need to specify the so like online shopping, is that the so I think it depends on what like you have to break it down into what eBay and Amazon are doing. So if you're talking just about like auction online auctions, then probably eBay goes yeah, that would go here. It'd be dominated by eBay, right? Okay, or if you're talking about um, online book sales, then that would probably go here as well. Okay, but if you're talking about specific features, just like online shopping, there's so many options there that that would have to go over here. Okay, so the tough thing about like Amazon is they get into so many different markets that you have to specify exactly what one we're talking about because they're in all kinds of I mean they're in monopolistic competition things, they're in oligopoly, and so it depends. Yeah, it depends kind of what the actual good or service is. Okay. What oops, what did I do here? Okay, so what else? Anything? And then, well, I mean, you can think of more, but Okay, so cable TV, you probably have one or two options depending on where you live. Home internet companies, you can probably get Verizon Fios, you could probably get Spectrum, and you might have a few other options. But all of these things, you see the idea where there's less than 10, in many cases, way less than 10 companies that you have to choose from. You have some choice, but not near as many choices as you have for cereal, shoes. Um, this one's on the border, but you see what I mean. Okay, so any other big ones you think I missed for examples of oligopoly? Okay, so yeah, this is a nice summary, I think, and this shows where all the markets kind of fit in, and then one we're going to talk about today and next time, which is oligopoly and kind of what describes that market. All right, so today, now that we know how everything kind of fits in the puzzle, we're going to talk about oligopoly, um, and this is kind of what it is, right? Okay. Okay, so any more questions on any of these four markets? Anything I missed? All right, so we'll come back to this later, and I'll. Okay, so we're gonna do a couple things in chapter 9, and so if you open up the chapter 9 Word document, let's start with that. And again, don't worry about the PowerPoint right now. It's not. I'm not sure if I'm gonna need it for today or tonight. So just open up this one, the chapter 9 Word document. Okay, so there's some optional videos on oligopoly here. We're going to talk about two main specific types today of a individual, like, so we're talking about oligopolies, and we're going to talk about something called a Cornell oligopoly and what that means, and then something called a Stackelberg oligopoly and what that means in some examples, and then we're going to do some big problems on each of those two types. Okay, and then next time we'll talk about advertising, if everyone can listen to those podcasts, and then uh, game theory as well. Oh wait, so yeah, another thing I forgot. Music streaming services is definitely going to be an oligopoly because there's only a few. There's YouTube Music, there's Amazon, and the main one's Spotify. But again, this is a good example of an oligopoly here. Okay, so let me introduce a specific type of oligopoly, which is called a Cournot oligopoly. And there's a little description here, and this is basically when you have an oligopoly where the companies essentially have an equal share. And so I think a good, well, let me read the description here. So this is The Cornell oligopoly doesn't address the issue of prices. Uh, this looks at output, and so the Cornell oligopoly is when there's a few firms serving many customers, like as any oligopoly, and when the firms produce either differentiated or homogeneous products, which is oligopoly. And but what the key here is that each firm believes rivals will hold their output constant if it changes, and so they're all the firm's output depends on the other firm's output, but they won't change it if they change theirs. Okay, so managers in a Cornell model bring choices that will affect total output, and they hope that their choices won't affect the choices of the competition. And so to apply this model, they're, the products on a marker must be either the same or segregated. And so this is where neither company has an incentive to change their output, given the other company's output. And this is the Cornell model. Okay, and so the example here is OPEC countries. And so there's a bunch of countries deciding how much output to produce of oil. And so they decide how much they want to produce, but it doesn't affect prices because, sorry, it doesn't, so it affects prices, but it doesn't affect how much they produce, doesn't affect how much their rivals produce. Now, the key here is that the other firms in the Cornell oligopoly, their um, output does depend on the other firms, but when they change something, the other firm isn't going to change with it. So this is essentially when most firms in this type of market or this type of oligopoly, Cornell, essentially have an even share or an equal say in not like when one firm dominates, like we'll talk about next the next model. Okay, so maybe some examples of Cornell. Okay, so we can probably use that specific one from the list of oligopolies as an example here of a Cornell, because I'm looking for something where there's not just one kind of big firm that dominates and there's a few other firms. I'm looking for something where there's essentially a few big firms, but they all kind of have an equal share of the market. And I think this is pretty applicable here, right? So if you talk about the game console market, I wouldn't say that I don't actually I don't really know the up-to-date games, but I'm pretty sure that the Sony PlayStation, the Microsoft Xbox, and whatever Nintendo has out, they're all pretty like they're all essentially like a third of the market. Is that is that fair, or would you say that one? From my understanding, it seems like the three of them pretty much split the market. I could be seeing that wrong, but that's kind of the example I'm going to go with. Yeah, is that does that seem accurate? Okay, so we're going to look at a mathematical example of this type of model, in which we're going to solve for, we're going to have two firms, In this case, we're going to have two Cornell oligopolies, and they're going to decide their output based on the other firm's output. Um, and essentially, we're going to maximize both firms' profit, but the outputs of both firms are dependent on the other firm, or their output depends on the other firm's output, but they don't change their output if the other firm changes it. Okay, so let me just. I think it might be easier if I just um, go through this one separately without having it solved here. So let's demonstration problem 9.4 for the Cornell is, let's suppose the inverse demand function for two Cornell duopolists. Okay, so we'll look at an example where there's two firms. So think of like one firm is Sony selling the PlayStation, and one firm is like Microsoft selling the Xbox. Okay, so suppose the inverse demand function for two Cornell duopolists is given below, and their costs are 0. Okay, so first thing is, what is each firm's marginal revenue? Okay, so this is essentially what we did last time with all the examples, except now there's two firms competing, and so there's going to be a marginal revenue function for each firm, for firm one and firm two. We're going to just call them firm one and firm two. Um, so all we need to do is first calculate a revenue function for each firm, and they're essentially going to be the same because these Corno duopolists, like Sony and Microsoft in the game console market, let's just assume they kind of split the market. So they're when we solve this, they're both going to have the same output and the same revenue. Okay, so let's first get the revenue of firm one. Okay, so revenue, remember, is price times quantity, but because there's two separate firms, it's going to be the price times the quantity of firm one. Okay, and then the revenue of firm two is going to be the price times the quantity of that firm. Okay, and all we got to do now is plug in the demand function for price, and then calculate the revenue function for each firm, which is going to, they're essentially going to be reciprocal functions for each of they're going to be symmetrical. Okay, so this is price. Okay, right? 10 minus Q1 minus Q2. That's the demand function with the two separate quantities. All right, and then multiply the price for 1 times Q1. Okay, so revenue firm 1, price times quantity. Do the same for firm 2. Okay, now let's just simplify here. Okay. Sorry. So we get 10Q1 minus Q1 squared, all right, minus Q2Q1. All right, and if we do the same for firm 2, okay, 10Q2 minus Q1Q2 minus Q2 squared. Okay, and now we want the marginal revenue of each firm. So we're going to differentiate each function, this one with respect to Q1 and this one with respect to Q2. Okay, so MR1 is if you differentiate R1 with respect to Q1. Okay, and for MR2, you differentiate R2 with respect to Q2. Oh, sorry, this. Okay, so if we differentiate this with respect to Q1, we're going to get MR, MR1 equals, so 10 minus 2Q1 minus Q2. Okay, so if you differentiate this with respect to Q1, you get 10 minus 2Q1 minus Q2, right? Okay, and MR2 is going to be differentiate this with respect to Q2, and we're going to get 10Q2, sorry, 10 10 minus Q1 minus 2Q2, right? Okay, so that's the marginal revenue for function of each firm. Okay, and then what are the reaction functions of the two firms? So the reaction function is just you want to find the output at which the profit maximizing output where MR equals MC for each firm as a function of that firm's output. So you're gonna get a function where firm one's output Q1 depends on Q2, and another equation where firm two's output Q2 depends on firm one's output. So depending on what the other firm's output is, that's what the output of this firm should choose. Okay, and so all we're gonna do here is do the just what we did last time with the one firm, where MR equals MC, but now we have two firms. So we want MR1 equals MC1 and MR2 equals MC2, and then we're going to find the best Q that satisfies those situations, yeah? Okay, so these are the profit maximizing output decisions for each firm. So we know we want to choose a firm would like to choose the output in which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And we learned that last time, and now we have two firms. So we want MR1 equals MC1 and MR2 equals MC2, and then we're going to solve for Q1 over here and Q2 over here. And we'll see that they're kind of going to be symmetrical. Sorry. Okay, so here's MR1, right? We just solved for that. And there, it tells us here the costs. So we made a simplification, and costs are zero. So if costs are zero total, then on the margin there's zero as well. So if costs are zero, then marginal costs are zero. Okay, and we calculated MR2 right there. And if both firms' costs are zero, then on the margin, the cost is also zero. Now all we have to do with these situations is over here, we're going to solve for Q1, and over here, we're going to solve for Q2. Okay, so just algebra at this point, so we get all right, so we just solve there. So we get 2Q1 equals 10 minus Q2, and then 2Q2 equals 10 minus Q1. And then let's just divide by 2 by both sides. Okay, so see how they're kind of the same equation, but for each firm. So we get the reaction function of firm 1 is Q1 equals 5 minus 1 half Q2. And the reaction function of firm 2 is Q2 equals 5 minus 1 half Q1. Okay, next part C, is what are the Cournot equilibrium outputs? Okay, and then so the easiest thing to do here is let's just so we have two equations and two unknowns. So let's plug this into here, and this, and then we'll solve the other one. So let's start with that. Okay, so we got the reaction function of firm 1, and let's plug in Q2, the reaction function of Q2. Let's plug this Q2 into here, right? So let's take this and put it into that equation. And this is Q2. Let's put it right there. All right, there it goes. Okay, and now all we're gonna do is solve for Q1, right? There's the only thing here is Q1 and a bunch of other stuff. Let's simplify and find out what Q1 is. Okay, a little algebra, we get Q1 equals 5 minus 5 halves plus 1/4 Q1, and then if we put the Q1 over there and we simplify this part, then we get what 1 minus a fourth is 3/4. Okay, and then 10 halves minus 5 halves is 5 halves. And if we just multiply both sides by 4/3, then we get 20/6 or 10/3. Yeah, and now let's take Q1 and put it into Q2's reaction function, and we should get the same output for firm 2, but let's double check that we did it right. Okay, there's firm 2's reaction function from part B. Let's plug in Q1. 10/3 goes right in there, and let's see what Q2 is. Okay, so let's put the 10/3 right there. All right, and then let's solve for Q2. We get 5 minus 10/6. All right, and then we get 30 over 5 can be changed to 30 over 6, and 30 minus 10 is 20. All right, and yeah, 10/3. Okay, so both firms have an output of 10/3. And then finally, what is the equilibrium price? All we got to do now is plug in the outputs into the demand function and find out what price will be charged on the market if both these firms choose these outputs. Okay, so take the demand function here. Then let's just plug in the 10/3 for Q1, the 10/3 for Q2, and see what price will be charged given these outputs for these two um, Cornell duopolists. All right, Q1 is 10/3. Q2 is 10/3. Um, this is going to be 10 minus 20/3. and we'll get 30 over 10 minus 20 over 3. I'm sorry, 30 over 3 minus 20 over 3 is 10 over 3. Okay, so it looks like we get everything is 10 thirds, I guess. Yeah, price is also 10 thirds. Okay. Okay, so the outputs came out kind of weird. I mean, not weird, but they came out as fractions in the price as well. But you can see that like the idea is that if you have two firms, two or more firms that essentially share the market, like my example was the Microsoft and Sony. Okay, and so that's why um, when you're choosing between buying these two things, within at least the newest version, they're almost like exactly the same price. I don't know the exact price now, but I bet you they're very close. I bet you they're both. I mean, let's say they're both like 500 bucks. I don't know exactly, but the price for both of these options for the newest model is going to be very, very similar, if not identical. And so that's why you're kind of choosing between, maybe Sony has one specific franchise that the consumers likes, or Microsoft has another feature or something. So you're really not deciding between price. You're deciding between which specific feature or brand or attributes you want to have. Okay, so I think that's a good example of a um, Cornell oligopoly. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Questions on this one here? All right, the other type I want to talk about and do an example for is called Stackelberg. So Stackelberg is where essentially there's one firm. So we're still talking about oligopolies, but there's usually a leader, and that firm's going to have a little bit more market power, and they're going to have more. They're just going to have more of the output. So in a Stackelberg oligopoly, there's a company that brings the first decision for increase in output, and after that decision is made, the other companies follow the examples of the leader company and adjust their outputs to maximize their profit. So characteristics where there must be a few companies serving many customers, okay, which is oligopoly. Companies produce either distinguished or similar products. A single company chooses output before other companies and their outputs, and other firms take as given the output of the leader and choose the output that maximizes profits given the leader's output and the barriers to entry and exit. Okay, and so there's essentially one bigger firm that they're not a monopoly, but they have a majority of them or most of the market, or they're a leader in the market, and they do their outputs first and the other firms follow behind. Okay, so here's their example, which I think is a good one. So Microsoft dominance in software markets. So they make their decisions first, and other small companies can react when they make their own decisions, and this in turn affects Microsoft. So what happens here in this example is that we're talking about software like Windows, not Windows, but Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint. So those things are purchased by most universities, businesses, and most of the spreadsheet software and the word processing software is dominated by Microsoft. There are some other options, but I'd say that they have most of the market. Okay, so let's use that as a nice example here. Actually, I thought of a more specific example. So let's use Microsoft PowerPoint. Okay, which is most of the market, and then there's also some other options that you can choose from, even though PowerPoint is the biggest. So there's the other one is, I forget how you spell it, but Prezi. Yeah, this. So I don't know if anyone still uses this, but um, this is not owned by Microsoft, but it is an option you can use for making presentations and PowerPoint, or they're not PowerPoints because they're not PowerPoints, but they're presentations. Yeah, I just want to make sure they're not somehow owned by Microsoft, but they're not. Okay. So I don't know if you've used Prezi before, but it's an option that you can use instead of PowerPoint. All right. So do you guys know what I'm talking about? Has anyone used Prezi before? Okay. Okay. So we'll go with that as a one example of Stackelberg. So most of the market is dominated by the leader, PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint, but there's other firms. In this case, we use Prezi as the follower. Okay. So that's our example. And let's go ahead and look at an example where we have actual numbers, and the firms are going to make decisions based on one firm being the leader and one firm being the follower. So let's suppose we have these inverse demand functions and these cost functions, and we're going to solve this problem with the fact that firm one goes first and firm two goes second. Okay. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find firm two's reaction function. Okay, so the reason why we don't want to find firm one's reaction function is because they're not going to react, they're going to go first. So there's only one firm that reacts, which is firm two, because essentially firm one is the follower. They're like the Microsoft PowerPoint in this example. So we do this the same way as we did before, but only with firm two. We want to find firm two's marginal revenue, and then firm two's reaction function based on firm one going first. Okay, let's first find the revenue of firm two. Okay, so revenue firm two is price times their quantity. Right, so this will be price. We'll multiply that by Q2. Okay, so there's firm one's revenue. Firm two's revenue. Let's simplify. Okay, 50 Q2 minus Q1 Q2 minus Q2 squared. And then let's find the marginal revenue, which is going to be differentiate this with respect to Q2. Okay, so we're going to get, if we differentiate this with respect to Q2, we're going to get 50 minus Q1 minus 2Q2. Okay, and we also need firm two's marginal cost. So if this is the cost function of firm two, um, C2 equals 2Q2. Right, that's given. So the cost function, it's only a variable cost. Cost function of firm two is 2Q2. And if we differentiate that with respect to Q2, so marginal cost of firm two is differentiate C2 with respect to Q2. All right, so these, oops, DC2, DQ2, and that's just going to be 2. Okay, so here's MR and here's MC. Now we just got to find the profit maximizing choice for the follower firm 2, where MR equals MC, and find Q2. All right, so MR2 is this. MC2 is 2, and now let's just solve for Q2. Okay, so add 2q2 to both sides and subtract 2, and we get 2q2 equals 48 minus q1. And that's now just divided by 2, and we got it. Okay, q2 equals 24 minus 1 half q1. So this is firm 2's reaction function. And again, firm 1 is not going to have a reaction function because firm 1 is going to go first. Firm 2 is the only firm that's going to react to the leader. So firm 2 is like Prezi, and firm 1, Microsoft, PowerPoint. They're going to choose how much PowerPoint software they want to sell first. Okay. Okay, next thing is what is firm one's output. So this what we're going to do is we're going to maximize revenue for firm one, given including or internalizing firm two's reaction function. So we're going to maximize revenue for firm one, knowing that firm two is going to do this when firm one goes first. So even though firm one goes first, it knows or it can calculate how firm two is going to react to its decision. Okay, so let's find the revenue, or sorry, let's find the profit function of firm one. Remember I used this for profit. Okay, so this is the profit of firm one, this pi thing. So profit of firm one is firm one's revenue minus firm one's cost. Okay. So we can calculate revenue, and the cost function is given right there. Okay, so revenue is price times quantity. And C1 is this, 2Q1. Okay, let's plug in the demand curve for price. Okay, 50 minus Q1 minus Q2. This is the demand curve here. And that goes right there, and then times Q1 minus, yeah, all right. So plug in the demand curve. Now let's simplify a little bit. Okay, we're gonna get 50 Q1 minus Q1 squared minus Q2 Q1 Okay, minus 2q1. So 50q1 minus q1 squared minus q2q1. Minus 2q1. All right, now let's what do we get? 48q1 Okay, so combine the Q1s, we get 48Q1 minus Q1 squared minus Q2Q1. All right, so this will start to simplify nicely once we plug in the reaction function of firm 2. So this is firm 1's profit, its revenue minus cost. What we're going to do now is plug in firm 2's reaction function Q2 right there, then simplify, and then maximize profit and figure out how much output firm 1, the leader, PowerPoint is going to choose. So let's put this here. Okay, so this right there. All right, now all we have is profit as a function of a bunch of Q1s, and we need to simplify. And once we do that, it's going to come out a little more clean here. Okay, 48Q1 minus Q1 squared minus 24Q1 plus 1/2 Q1 squared. Okay, 48Q1 minus Q1 squared minus 24Q1 plus 1/2 Q1 squared. Yeah, that looks right, I think. Okay, now let's combine the Q1 squared and the Q1s, and it should look a little bit cleaner here. Um, 48 minus 24 is 24Q1, and minus 1 plus a half is minus 1/2 Q1 squared. Okay, so it looks a lot nicer. Now all we have to do is maximize profit by choosing Q1 for this for firm one's profit. So we need to find the uh, point when this function maximizes, which is when we differentiate profit with respect to Q1 and set it equal to 0 because that's the point in which the profit is at its peak, right? Kind of like doing the marginal benefit one where we were finding that high point. Let's see if I can. All right, so if you can see this, we're going to find the point at which the the profit function maximizes and essentially the slope, the derivative reaches zero. So see how it's going to go like this, increasing and then start decreasing. We want the point when it exactly hits the peak, and that's the point if firm one can calculate it, Microsoft, PowerPoint, where they'd like to set their output. So we're going to differentiate profit with respect to Q1 and find out when it equals zero because that's going to be at this point. Okay, so let's maximize profit with respect to Q1. So we're going to maximize this by choosing Q1. Okay, and so all we need to do is differentiate this with respect to Q1 and set that result equal to zero, and that's the point in which profit is maximum, or that's the Q1 in which the profit reaches its highest point, and that's the point where firm one, the leader, should choose its output Q1 star. Okay, so we want this. We want to differentiate this with respect to Q1 and find out what Q1 that is when that situation equals zero, because that's when the profit's at its highest point. So let's differentiate this with respect to Q1, and we're going to get and set it equal to zero. We're going to get 24 minus 2 times a half is just 1, and 2 minus 1 is 1. So we're going to get Q1. Okay, so we're going to get 24 minus Q1 equals 0. And obviously, if we solve this for Q1, the Q1 is going to be 24. Okay, so that was the long part there, finding Q1's firm one's output, and now all I have to do is find firm two's output. That's easy because we just plug in firm one's output, the leader, into firm two's reaction function. Okay, so we got this. We know what Q1 is now. Let's just plug in Q1 right to there. Okay, so here's firm two's reaction function. They're going to react to this. So Q1 goes right there. Okay, Q1 is 24. We're going to plug that in for Q1. And then we get 24 minus 1 half 24. 24 minus 12. Okay, and 24 minus 12 is 12. Okay, so firm 2, the follower, is going to have exactly half the output of firm 1, the leader. So it's not so much that firm 1 is charging a higher price, is that they have control of the market, they get to go first, they're just going to sell more. So this is what, like, a lot of the firm, if you looked at the examples of the firms where like one firm dominates, Okay, like Amazon and online books, it's not that Amazon gets a ton more, they don't charge a higher price, right? Their books are actually probably cheaper than their competitors. They make the most profit by just selling the most output. They just sell the most stuff, right? They don't, it's not like they're increasing prices to get more revenue. Amazon's trick, especially for like online books, is just selling the most. They sell the most books, and by doing that, it doesn't matter what the price is as long as they get most of the market. All right, same thing here. I think that it's not that Spotify charges a higher price necessarily for their service. They just got most of the customers. Okay, they have the biggest variety of music. They've been around the longest. They have the most, agreements or rights. And I don't know how much like uh, YouTube Music or Amazon Music is individually, but it's probably similar. And it's not that you can get you can get this for, you have to pay more for the dominating service. They just get the most customers. Okay, so you'll see that in the oligopoly examples, the big companies that dominate the specific market or the specific region don't necessarily or don't really charge higher prices. They just have most of the customers. Okay, so last part here. What is the market price? Okay, that part's easy. All we have to do is take the demand function, plug in Q1 and Q2, and that's the price that's going to come on this market. Okay, let's plug in Q1 24 and Q2 12 into this, and then find out what the market price is for these presentation options. Okay, 54 minus Q1 24 minus Q2 12, and we get 50 minus 36, and 50 minus 36 is 14. Okay, I do that right? Yeah. All right. So again, like I tried to use as an example for this one. So before we had the two companies kind of sharing the market, Xbox and PlayStation. All right, here we have one brand. So let me just kind of summarize just based on the example I tried to give. Okay. So what I was trying to illustrate here, hopefully, is Microsoft is the leader and dominates the presentation software market with PowerPoint. Prezi is the follower, and they both charge the same price, but Microsoft sells 2 times the output. So they're not charging a higher price. They're just getting much more customers to buy PowerPoint and subscribe to PowerPoint and use PowerPoint online than Prezi gets in their option. Okay, so uh, yeah, makes sense. Questions on this type of example here? Okay, so I have another example here, but I'm not going to go through it all because it's pretty much doing the same thing. So look through this one because you have a homework question similar here. So what we got for this one comparing oligopoly models is to see further how each form of oligopoly affects firms. It's useful to compare models covered this chapter in terms of individual firm output, prices in the market, and profits for a firm. So what we do here is we'll use the same market demand and costs for each firm when looking at the model. And here's the inverse demand function, and here's the cost for each firm. So this example, here's the demand function. Okay, so this is just, okay, this is under the chapter 9 um, Word document, this after we did the other two examples. Okay, so what you want to do here, or what you see here is the example, is we'll do the same thing. You can look here, and this is kind of what you'll do in the homework. You'll take a demand function, an inverse demand function, and a general cost function. Okay, and what you want to do is look at it from the Cornell, where you want to set up the revenue functions for firm one and firm two, and then find marginal revenue for each firm. Okay, and then what I did here is found the profit maximizing Q1 by setting MR1 equal to MC2, and the profit maximizing Q2 by setting MR2 equal to MC2, and this is the uh, reaction function of firm one and the reaction function of firm two. Okay, and then you solve for the output of each firm by plugging in the other reaction function and getting one equation with one unknown. And for the Cornell, they should, if you do it correctly, they should both sell the same output here. And then to get the market price, just plug in the quantities into the demand function. Okay, and then if you calculate profit, all you have to do is calculate revenue, price times quantity for each firm minus their cost, and you should get for the Cornell that they both get the same profit because they're both selling the same output at the same price, like PlayStation and Xbox. Okay, then you can compare the same demand function and the same cost structure using the Stackelberg model, where you have firm one, which is the leader like PowerPoint, and firm two, which is the follower like Prezi, and do the same thing we just did in the example, where you find firm two's reaction function, you find the profit of firm one, revenue firm one minus cost firm one. Okay, set that up, and then plug in firm two's reaction function into firm one's profit, and set up the profit function of firm one. Okay, then maximize profit with respect to Q1 by doing differentiating profit one with respect to Q1 and set that equal to 0, and then find the leader firm one's output. Okay, and then all you got to do after that, that's the hard part, just put in firm one's output into firm two's reaction function and find Q2. And if you do it correctly, uh, under Stackelberg, firm two is going to have half exactly half of the output of firm one. Okay, then finding the price is easy. Just plug in the two quantities you found into the demand function and solve for P. And you should see also, to double check, that the price under Stackelberg is going to be a little bit less than the price under Cournot. And so that's again because the firms that dominate under Stackelberg don't make the most of their money by charging the most price. They just get the most customers. They just dominate the market and they get the most. They sell the most output. Okay, whereas this type of market, they essentially split it, and because they split it, they want to charge the same price, which is a little bit higher, and make the customer choose based on features and branding and stuff like that. Okay, then the last thing is you can find firm one's profit under Stackelberg, which is just price times quantity minus cost, and firm two's profit under Stackelberg, which is price times quantity minus cost. And you should see that if you do it correctly and look at this example, that firm one makes double the profit of firm two under Stackelberg, right? And that's because they sell double the output uh, at the same price. Okay, so here's the the chapter 9 Word document. Here's the one we just did. It's more neat here, but here's the one we just solved, demonstration problem 9.4. Here's the other one we just solved together, demonstration problem 9.6. It's a little bit neater. And then you can look at this one as an example when you're doing the homework, which is essentially doing this analysis here. So the homework assignment is homework chapter 9. Okay, and then here it is. So all you got one question. So you got a inverse demand function. You have a general cost function, so all the costs are 2Q1 or 2Q2, and then do it under Cournot. Find firm one's quantity and profit, firm two's quantity and profit, and the market price. Do it under Stackelberg. Find firm one's quantity and profit, firm two's quantity and profit, and the market price, and then find out which firm makes the highest profit, which should be Stackelberg firm one, and the lowest profit should be Stackelberg firm two, and which market should have the lowest market price. If you do it correctly, that should be Stackelberg. Okay, so that's your assignment for next week. Okay, post that under discussions for chapter 9 homework. Um, Questions on what I want you to do for this one, this assignment? Okay, so just to sum up, we're here. We'll wrap up today's meeting. It's past 8 o'clock. So chapter 8 homework is due today. So post that under discussions, all right, by midnight tonight. And the homework chapter 9 is due next week under discussions. All right, so post that there. And if you have any questions on that one, you can email me. And again, next week we're going to do chapter 10, game theory. I think you'll like some of the game theory stuff. And then I gave you some podcasts that I want to, because they're very relevant to game theory and advertising, that if you want to listen to, we'll talk about those next time. So if you go to chapter 10, there's a Does Advertising Actually Work? Part 1 from for economics, another one from part 2, and they're both free. You can listen to them here. Or if you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can listen. That's where I listen to mine. So if you can find them easily on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, or if you they're here as well. So you should be able to find these, or you can listen to them here. But I would like to talk about both of these. And they're like 40 minutes each, so they're a little not too long, but I think they're both very relevant to where we're going to go and talk about advertising game theory next week. So if you get a chance, listen to those, and we'll talk about those in game theory and finish up on oligopolies next week. Okay, so I think that's it for tonight. Um, Everyone, please have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next Monday. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.